Daale Carter is a powerhouse creative executive and the first ever global chief client experience officer at BBDO Worldwide. She was appointed early in 2026, and her role signals a major evolution for the agency network, shifting the focus from traditional account management to a holistic, experience-driven partnership model. Before stepping into her global role, Daale served as EVP and Managing Director at Energy BBDO, where she was known for bridging the gap between high-level strategy and experiential marketing. Her career actually began in entertainment law before she moved into music, event production, and media strategy. This diverse background, combining legal rigor, event logistics, brand empathy, allows her to view the client-agency relationship through a very unique lens. She is a vocal advocate for intentional marketing that has led to high impact work for global brands by focusing on how culture moves faster than traditional agency systems. Daale, thanks so much for coming on, joining us, spending a little bit of time.
Yeah. Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. So before we get into the meat of your thesis and essentially how you're reinventing or strengthening the idea of the client relationship throughout BBDO and the Omnicom enterprise, could we maybe spend a little bit of time on your background? I think it's obviously always interesting when people decide to become lawyers and then they end up not practicing law. Yeah, oftentimes I know that comes from parents having a certain vision for their children, that maybe didn't quite pencil for what you wanted to do. But love to hear a little bit about where you grew up, where'd you study, why'd you decide to go to law school, and then ultimately how did you get out of that into agency life?
Absolutely. It's a very random story, but I'm from London originally, so grew up in London. I often tell people that in the UK you have to pick what you want to do for the rest of your life at 16, because that's when you start
Wow.
applying for college and you have to pick your track. And I'd say maybe now, but then there was a little less flexibility, so you needed to have an idea. And I wouldn't say it was parental pressure, but certainly I had a lot of family in legal fields. And I always wanted to be rich. So it felt like somewhere I could go. But particularly, I was from a very young age, very interested in the music industry and entertainment, and really liked the idea of pursuing entertainment law as a way to stay connected in the entertainment industry, but still be rich. So I went to University of Westminster, and it was the only school in London at the time that had an entertainment law specialty. And I will say I loved studying law. I actually preferred criminal law to entertainment law, ironically. But I loved studying law. And my husband would argue now that he tells me things like, you should still be a lawyer, because I watch the ID channel all the time and I always take before the end. But so through entertainment law at the time, I was heavily involved in kind of the entertainment scene. So used to run a lot of kind of private events. So it started out as club nights that then became like celebrity parties that I would run. And my random but interesting segue into advertising was that I was running a series of events at the time, and with some very, with a lot of kind of celebrities. And somebody had asked my cousin if they knew anybody who was really well connected in the music industry. They worked for EA Sports, and EA had just put this massive experiential piece of business with this agency in London, but the agency didn't have any connections to the music industry. So they asked if they knew somebody who was well connected in music that could basically help them deliver. It was this random bus that would go around the country with like singers, artists delivering workshops, and then someone would win the chance to get their music featured as a soundtrack to a game. It's pretty cool. So they recommended me. I went to work at secondment for the agency to help them with their, I guess, influencer relationships before they were cool. I don't want to age myself, so I'm sure you're thinking I'm very young. But yeah, so to help them with their influencer relationships. And so that's what my job was, like call a friend, be like, hey, can we get you to do this thing with EA? Can you turn up? And then that was how I started agency life. And at the end of that contract, EA were like, oh, we want you to help us with our relationships. And the agency was like, can you stay? And the rest is history. That was how I got into the industry. And from there, hopped to the next agency and was like, okay, I kind of like it on this side. But it's a very unorthodox path for sure.
Yeah, very much so. And not always, some people come through a very traditional background, but I feel like more than ever, agencies are open to, bringing in people with outside thinking and different kinds of backgrounds in order to bring unique thinking to the clients. So, when did you start working within the Omnicom network, specifically BBDO?
Yeah, I joined BBDO 3 years ago, which does not sound like a long time because a lot of people you meet at BBDO have been there, actually have been there for decades and
Yeah,
decades. And so, I joined BBDO 3 years ago.
I love it. And then, when did you start thinking about this idea of the client relationship and kind of how you could manage client relationships differently, how you could start thinking about more successful models of retention? Because obviously it sounded like you were a little bit closer to the strategy and the execution in the early days, obviously being this bridge between traditional celebrities and video game industry like EA, stuff like
Mhm.
that, which is, like you said, kind of creator marketing or influencer marketing before it was, such a robust
Absolutely.
practice within agency world. When did you start moving more to the client services side, and when did you kind of notice that maybe some of the traditional systems that had been in place were ripe for disruption, shall
Yeah,
we say?
absolutely. I think so I remember like I would get interviewed and people would be like, what's your passion? And it was easier for me to tell them the thing that I didn't do because I had touched every corner possible of kind of like the marketing industry. After I left that job, I went into work at Publicis, which was obviously a much more traditional agency setting. And I actually stepped out of it for a while because I was like, oh no, this feels like too rigid. Like there are too many parameters. I'm a free spirit. I think though, over the years, very quickly to the point of being more aligned with the strategy, I kind of created a lane for myself, which was more about being a strategic business leader, which was less about just doing and more about having really honest conversations throughout. And what I learned over the years was it was really funny because Lee just said, people will tell you I'm very direct. And I was always very direct with my clients and they really liked it. So I think that was an unlock because the customer is always right. Like these are all the things that have like plugged into you when you work in a service industry. And so there was a point actually pretty early on in my career where I remember having like a bit of an argument with a client where I was just like, I trust you as an expert in your industry, and then you should trust me as an expert in mine. But that was actually an unlock for a great relationship. And so for me, it just became about building authentic client relationships, caring deeply about client business. Like I just never understood people who can run a business who know nothing really about the industry and could just like satellite in and check a few boxes, and really just be like relentlessly committed to doing the right thing. And by doing the right thing, that means a lot of the time that is misaligned with what the client wants or what they think they want. And sometimes it's misaligned with how the agency's thinking about it holistically. So I think I just really focused on relentlessly paving a way that was just centered on just being real honest relationships, being business partners. So I've never went from being an account manager to being a president of the office. I've never looked at myself as being more junior and speaking to a client. It's just like we are business partners and we have an objective to solve. And how are we going to partner to do this? And in partnering to do that, we're going to fall out. We're going to love each other. We're going to brainstorm and come up with great solutions together, but all in service. I think what's also helped me is prior to coming to BBDO, I spent 9 years working in a media agency. And there are some really interesting things about working in media that can be complementary and advance in the traditional industry space. So if you think about how media models are priced, you're not focused on selling parts of a person. You're focused on what are the outcomes we're trying to achieve and how do we get there. So I think that has also helped me in terms of not just a style, but having just a very varied and different background that leads me to think differently than maybe historical models have shown up.
Yeah, I love that. I love the idea of kind of deep diving on a client. You know, I think a lot of companies come to agencies because they bring outside thinking, right? They work
Mhm.
on different problems on different days of the week, and they may not be experts on, say, financial services, but there's something that can be applied to from the video game industry or the automotive industry or pharmaceuticals that can be, you know, brought to bear and maybe executed on their behalf. But, you know, you also need subject matter expertise.
Absolutely.
There's all sorts of things that, you know, kind of come in working with a particular type of account. Um, you know, one of the reasons I started this podcast was because I wanted to learn the Adobe tools. I worked on the Adobe business at my last agency for 8 years. And I also went to every conference that they went to, no matter how boring, you know, like some of them were really
Cool.
exciting, like the, you know, the off conference in Barcelona,
Cool.
where it's all about creativity and stuff like that. But then there were like the more technical conferences
Yeah.
where it's like, oh gosh, this isn't as exciting, but it's like, it's really necessary to learn. How can agency people become subject matter experts on their client's business while still remaining objective and having that outside thinking? How do you find that balance of, you know, going all in with the client on their business, but also bringing outside thinking to the table?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Listen, I think y- sometimes you have clients where the industry in itself may not be something that you're particularly fascinated by. You know, not every client industry is sexy. And I think it is about finding that balance of everybody wants to show up in a room and speak and be and feel like they have a point of view that someone's going to listen to. And so I think the importance of understanding how clients make money. I think that's how do they make their money? Two, like what is keeping them up at night? How are they thinking about their business and what does their boss need to see from them in order for them to be deemed a success? And so I think if you start agency people from there, which is like you just need to know, like our job is to help them achieve their business goals, but also make them look good. And so if you know what it is that they need to attack from your perspective, even if it's not an industry that you're passionate about, focus in on what the business problems are, like focus in on what they need to solve. And you should want to be an investigator and investigate how you can help them solve those problems. We've also recently started to think about like not everybody wants to do that, and that is quite okay, right? You have some people like me, I was on the more in the strategic side, and you have other people who love the execution and delivery side of the business. And so like at BBDO, we've started to look at how those roles partner together really closely, but how that they're truly two truly defined lanes. So if you are going to be a business leader, then you better care about the business and you better want to be that business partner. And if you're going to be focused on executional excellence, then you should care about the strategy of being successful and the making money and all of that. So I think the balance is really, I don't think you can succeed with clients and neglect what people need to feel fulfilled in their job. So I think you've got to start with the people within your organization and make sure you've got the right people oriented to wanting to do that. The next thing is then continuing to bring them along. And for us, like the power of no has been something that's really successful because a lot of people just think it's the job is about just doing more of what's asked. I think once you give people a bit of their power back, the excitement and the passion to learn more actually unlocks because they realize that it's not learning all at the expense of what they're good at, but it's figuring out how to balance those two things.
Yeah, let's dig into that idea, the power of no, a little bit. You know, I think unfortunately, because of the level of competition, how many agencies there are, you know, procurement battles between the big five and
Mhm.
every brand, you know, every 2 years putting an account into review, whether things are great, whether things are bad, it just doesn't matter. It's just like a standard procedure. Like every 2 years, we're going to put it into procurement and see if we can get a better deal. The procurement of agencies moving from the chief marketing officer to procurement officers whose KPIs and jobs are about, you know, getting these services for less and less money each year. You know, how do you maintain a relationship with a client, like you mentioned, that's based on candor and creative problem solving and true partnership when you know, sometimes we're forced into these positions where we do have to be yes men. We have to say yes to anything that comes down the pipe, whether it makes us money, whether it loses us money, whether it stretches teams, or a lot of times I feel that some of the procurement relationship cycles become detrimental to the overall relationship, but nobody wants to lose business. So how do you walk that tightrope?
Procurement. Here's what I'll say. I have not ever been in a position where being honest has lost a client. And I think the thing that procurement are putting up for bidding is not the relationship, it is the output. So if we pretend that everybody comes into the conversation or everybody's seated at the table with exactly the same output, we're not competing then. I can compete on price, somebody else can compete on people, like that's easy. So the thing that can't be commoditized is the relationship, is the value that you add above and beyond the set of deliverables. Because I think, to the point that the most creative relationships go into review, it's almost never about the relationship, it's almost about the output. And so sometimes you can have amazing creative output collectively with a client, but there's no depth in the relationship that keeps them kind of with you. And so for me, I just think that I'm just allergic. I'm allergic to not being real but in pursuit of what's best for the client. So it's not about, and sometimes that looks like holding our hands up and being like, hey, we screwed up. And sometimes that looks like standing our ground and saying to a client, hey, you screwed up, and I have those conversations all the time. I have a client who makes me laugh. And when I met somebody who was then coming in to work on the business, they said they sat with a client, and the client said, I really like her because she told me that all of my briefs were crap. And I was like, I didn't say that. That's not what I said. But ultimately, that's what they received. But guess what? That client went through a gigantic review, a huge global review. But the thing that we worked with them on, which was creativity, was never up for grabs. And I think that's fact that they value that, and they literally cornered it off. Like, every other area of my business is up for review except for this thing, because this relationship is so important to us. It's a relationship built on transparency. It's a relationship that has been hard at times, but one where, again, we are committed to doing the best work, and is our client that we do the very best work with, because there's just that level of honesty. So the procurement bubble is only going to get worse. And I think, coming from a media background, I know that, like, you're competing on rates, and it's all a commodity. Media, print, like, it's just who can charge the least. But when you strip that away, like, who can the client call up and know that they're going to get what they need, and they're going to help them solve their problem, or they're going to give them an honest response. I think that's where I see the success.
I love that. I'm fascinated by your new title, Global Chief Client Experience Officer. This may at one point been called a growth relationship, or, but really the idea of solidifying this scope in the idea of, like, I think about what's the experience the client's going to have by being part of the BBDO Worldwide network, right?
Yes.
Some of your competitors are thinking about that, like thinking about the idea of, like, hey, if you leave holding company X, I want you to feel like you've lost something. I want you to feel FOMO. I want you to feel like the same brand attachment that you have to your American Express Platinum card, because you get into, the cool lounge at the airport, and you get to attend, you get clear for free, and you get, chargebacks to go to these nice and fancy restaurants. Like, what are the things that you're thinking about from an experience perspective that you want clients to feel as almost like members of the BBDO Worldwide family?
I love this question. I think it's a few things. I think the title is intentional, right? It's not Chief Client Officer and it's not Growth Officer. The experience is the key. I think Amex is a great example, right? If you think about your hotel points and you belong to specific hotel groups, that experience is consistent and you go back again and again. I think from our perspective, like, I'm sure you've seen out in the world, do big things being our positioning. I think we want our clients to feel the weight of that, like to the point where we no longer have to explain that. And I think what for us is ultimately the thing that I've been talking about. Like, I don't want you to feel like, to your point earlier, that you're working with BBDO and the work is great, but it's in service of chasing awards. We want you to feel like when you sit with BBDO, from the creative to me, to your business lead, that you are working with a true business partnership. And I think that business partnership, or your thought partner, is such a critical part in this, because so much of client relationships becomes about getting stuff done, and it doesn't become about building that business partnership together. And I think to give an example, I have somebody on a team who the client actually worked on the agency side. They've worked at our agency historically, and now they're client side. And they've had different business people or different account leaders that they've worked with. And the thing that they said was, I have my partner, like I have the person who understands me, who understands my business, and is always thinking about how we solve that together. I think that's what we want people to feel. We want to feel the sense of true partnership. I think the second thing is just like the prioritization being about the same things that keep them up at night, and not about just getting to the flashy creative idea. Like, we should get there. If we're doing it right, we should get there anyway, but that being the last thing that we're looking to do, as opposed to the first thing. And then I think, to the point of the question you asked about, like, what makes somebody, like a client, be like, I want to stay with this holding company. For me, I am always mortified if a client says, if you are not working there, I don't want to be there. Like, I want the client to feel that way about working with every single person, like in the agency, across the network. There should be a consistent level of energy, a willingness to say no, excitement to help them. I think those are all some of the really important things that we want clients to feel. And I just don't ever want a client who works with BBDO to feel like they work with any kind of order taker.
I love that. Let's talk about how you scale this type of culture across the account team, because ultimately, like, this is awesome positioning, and obviously the network values this by creating this title and creating this scope for you. But we all know comp plan dictates behavior, and at the end of the day, like this, it has to roll down to the front line, right? So you're introducing a new level of accountability throughout the firm, prioritizing client relationships in a way that the industry at large doesn't generally have a way to measure. Yeah. How will you measure relationship success in a way that's as rigorous as traditional KPIs that agencies are familiar with, like ROAS and reach and things of that nature?
I mean, I think it's simple. If your clients don't have a good experience, that shows up as commoditization, many pitches, loss of revenue, declining revenue, relationship losses. I could go lots of lost words. It's pretty black and white. Like, if your clients are unhappy, they leave, you lose money. Or you see it. Like, we all know what the signs are. You see the decline over time. Sometimes those are industry headwinds, but often it's as a symptom of a declining, and that is often disguised as we're looking for greater efficiency. If a client's coming to a creative agency and a business agency, and the first line of conversation is efficiency, you're losing the conversation. So what success looks like is growing revenue, stable to growing revenue. It looks like expansive client relationships. So there is a lot of tools and tech out there. Omnicom has the best of the best. And I think any holding company would argue that there sometimes are a lot of tools, and clients would argue that they don't really understand or even see those tools in play. So success also looks like deeper implementation of all the things that BBDO and that we have and that the network have to offer, that again help clients accelerate their business. But fundamentally, the biggest KPI is our revenue growing outside of new business? Is our revenue growing? Are we retaining our clients? or are we seeing our clients continue to decline? And then all the other things like client satisfaction scores and all of the things that tell us what the client sentiment is and how they feel. But ultimately, if you do it right, you grow. If you're not doing it right, you are consistently trying to plug a hole.
Yeah, seems pretty simple, actually. Um,
It sounds simple, right?
well, I think, I was thinking of like, oh, maybe there's some like, very, new world AI models of like measuring how something like this pans out. But I think you put it in much more plainer terms, which is if clients are doing well, they're going to stay with you and they're going to expand scopes. If the opposite is true, it's going to go in the other direction. So it's very longitudinal in that way. Let's talk about another issue, which is the continual notching down of the average tenure of a CMO, or the elimination of the CMO title in totality. Every year there are less CMOs, and there are CMOs that are spending less time within their roles. I think the average last time I looked was 15 months. How do you as an agency help a CMO reverse some of that trends, at least within the CMOs that you can control and the relationships that you have? And also knowing that the number one thing that a lot of these CMOs need is the ability to articulate to the C-suite in things that they can understand other than creative things. How can you help clients reverse those trends that are unfortunately a headwind for most CMOs these days?
Yeah, there is quite a sad state of affairs to see. I mean, I think it starts. I feel like I'm. It sounds repetitive, but that's not the intention. I think fundamentally, our job for a long time, the role of creative agency has maybe been disconnected with the objective of the CMO. The objective of the CMO is not to put out the most beautiful work in the world and have everybody praise them and see all of their ads and all of the press and be, exhilarated. Because all too often we see where that happens and it doesn't drive any type of business results. Like, it drives brand awareness sometimes, but it doesn't always drive bottom line revenue growth. And so I think how we can help CMOs is from day one, whether it's a new CMO or someone we've worked with for a long time, is really, really understanding what their KPIs are. I was really encouraged where I sat in a briefing recently with creatives and strategists, and the creatives pumped brakes on the conversation and were just like, I'm struggling to see what the business objective is. Like, what does this work? They've worked on this campaign and this platform years, but what does this work need to do for the business? So I think for us, the best thing we can do for our CMOs is augment them around just that, like understanding what the business needs to deliver and finding creative solutions to that, rather than finding creative solutions in the hope that it will make them look good. Because almost always the CMO is going to be charged with a laundry list of metrics that they need to deliver. And our job is to help them figure out how to deliver them. And so to me, it's like nothing less than that. And if we're thinking about it any differently, then we're not setting them up for success. And I've seen CMOs go across other agency relationships in the past for that reason, which is they've done the best work of their lives, but they haven't done anything materially to move the business.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that off camera, the idea that sometimes, the agency's always pitching a film, always something that can be submitted for an award season, something that will boost their portfolio, but it's not always a film. It's not always something that's award winning. Luckily, so many of the awards have now moved to a model where they're not just driving, creativity, but they're also looking at efficiency, the Effies most famously. Yeah. And I think, the awards, if they want to continue to be relevant and if they want agencies to continue to spend the money in producing the applications and marketing the awards and attending them, then they have to, the reasons in which people win awards need to closely mirror the client objective. Absolutely. And it feels like we're at least moving in the right direction there, I would say.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
All right. So we talked a little bit about, how you were thinking about shaking up, the org chart in a way of like redefining, this idea of like, the person who just wants to execute creatively and they're kind of, more from that creative execution production side of things. And then
Mhm.
the account side that is more deeply rooted in the client objectives and really understanding the actual business and being the advocate internally for the agency for the client. Would you say that you're trying to move things into a direction which shakes up the definition or structure of a standard account team?
Yes, so we did away with the term account because also that and notes. And I have to say, even at my most early entry foray into account manager, I never enjoyed that term because I felt like someone that worked in the finance industry. Um, so we did away with account management, and the department holistically is called business leadership because I think it just does what it says on the tin. And to the point of being business partners, our job is to lead. When we surveyed our clients, one of the things that they came back with was, I just want my partner to lead me, show me what I need to be thinking about. If you think about it, right, like to the point of influencer before influencer, if you are sitting in a CMO seat or a CEO seat or any type at a brand, you've got to worry about influencers and social and digital and your traditional advertising, and oh, by the way, your data has to be superior to everybody else and you need to be able to show attribution and all of these things, and there's just an overwhelm of capabilities or things that you need to be excellent at. And while we don't proclaim for our business leaders to be that they're excellent at each of those things, they surely know who to connect with to ensure that we can bring forward an integrated solution to help clients. And so the idea is that, and that has helped us internally, just say people like, hey guys, you're not account managers, you are business leaders, you are a business owner, you own the business's outcomes, work with your client to figure out what they need. That paradigm shift, not just for clients but also for our people, has been empowering for our people, and for clients kind of shifted that mindset that, yes, I feel like I'm working with people who can really lead me where I need to go.
You recently wrote about the dangers of overbundling for the sake of efficiency. Obviously, there's kind of feels like there's a pendulum
Yeah.
shift constantly of like, I want a holding company relationship. I want one primary client manager. I want the agency of one model. And then I want to get the specialities of all of the different tent poles within that holding company. And like my AOR is going to be the relationship in which I interact with the rest of the network. And then, then you see like a swing to the other end of like, oh, independent is cheaper and faster and more nimble. And we've got an NFT agency and we've got a metaverse agency and we've got an esports agency and we've got a gaming agency. And then, a client wakes up one day and they've got 500 agencies on their roster and they're like, what am I doing? There's too many people telling my brand story.
Yeah.
How do you take the agency of one model or the holding company model, create that efficiency of having, one key relationship running, an agency network or a group of bundling within the network, but you're not just, adding in services just to say, oh yeah, we can do that. We can do anything. And how do you then break down silos to make sure that those teams all work well with each other under, the lead agency?
Yeah, I mean, I think the multiple agency model from a client perspective, you can just look at any of the most recent reviews where clients are talking about wanting to consolidate back with one agency and almost always end up with 3 different holding companies. So I think what has become interesting is that clients are identifying different things with different groups. So I think the need for IAT models to be really, really integrated is greater than ever, because we will often be at the table as holding companies coming together. I'd say within our it's really important that our people understand but don't overload. So I think that the onus on us is that those capabilities, those strengths are that whoever's leading the business, whoever's at the helm, understands those capabilities, understands when to tap them, but doesn't feel like they have to go on a constant grocery shopping mission just to prove that that does the opposite, that has the opposite effect. If it's like, ta-da, look at my 10 capabilities versus here's where we excel and this is where we think you should concentrate your time. I think when we overwhelm clients with lots of things in a world that they're already overwhelmed, we don't help them create any discipline or help them feel like that they can better manage it. So for us, the focus is on understanding like what are the critical needs, like what does truly need to be integrated and embedded, and then figuring out how to bring those people to the table in a way that we have oversight of the relationship. And to the point of agility, that requires a lot of agility and iteration. So we've had instances where it's like, everybody come to the table day one and go. It's gone horribly. And we've had instances where it has been different groups, like you up, then you up, then you up. And what you find is that there's a disconnection at the end. And so there is a lot of trialing, and the model varies by client. I will say that. I don't think that there's a consistent way between any two clients that they like to interact with their agencies. Some clients want to talk to the person who's placing media. Well, then we'll put that person on the phone. Some clients don't, and we also won't. So I'd say for me, the biggest thing in that holdco model is I don't believe in any rigidity. In other words, like we build and we scale according to what the client needs, but the starting point is that the people who are leading the business have a deep understanding of what's possible and what capabilities are at our hands, but are also able to be sensible about how they implement them.
Yeah, I love that. You mentioned that interesting dynamic that often happens where a client will have strategy, creative, and media with different holding companies. I've seen it from the vendor side where I start talking about a project with strategy or PR, and then I get handed to the creative agency, or start usually with creative, then it gets handed off to PR or some kind of secondary execution, and then it eventually gets handed to media for the buy. And it's extremely frustrating as a vendor because like you think you're on the right track, and then you get to media and then you get like shoved out the door for another partnership.
Yeah.
But also, it also seems like oftentimes like within that, within that track, it's kind of like the reason why maybe a vendor or partner doesn't stay attached is because there's kind of resentment, like, oh, the strategy team put this together and they wrote the brief with this vendor, why should I pay attention to what they said?
Absolutely.
Because, it's like, it feels a little like there's like this spirit of maybe sometimes it's healthy competition, sometimes it's unhealthy competition.
100%.
Do you think clients do that because they want a little bit of, not friction, but they want some checks and balances within the pipeline? I don't know. To me, it often sometimes feels almost borderline vindictive.
Yeah, I think sometimes clients, so I don't think it's for competition. I mean, certainly I think sometimes clients want to protect their interests, right? Like if you go all in one place and that one place isn't everything you dreamed it would be and more, then it's harder, particularly bigger clients. So it's kind of diversifying the risk a little bit. I do think that can be a motivating factor. I genuinely believe that sometimes clients walk into a room with a very clear idea of what they want to do. Like they will go in thinking, I want to, almost always when people walk into a pitch room, they have a bias towards who they want or what they want. But then I do think they sometimes see something. You see creative over here, and I loved, but there was that brilliant person, to the point of client experience, was that brilliant group of people over there, and their creative wasn't great, but they brought something really magical. I want to work with them. And you can't beat their media rates. So I have to have them. And then you find yourself in a position where you're like, okay, now I'm back having so I often think I think the magic is in the process when it comes to pitching. And I think if you land on one part and you miss on another, there's always someone else that's been in the room that has sparked something. So I think a lot of the time that's what maybe brings those scenarios together.
Yeah, that makes sense. Why not have a little bit of the magic from the best parts of all the pies, you know, when you're in there baking the pie. Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Well, Daale, been fascinating to get to chat with you a little bit this morning. Congratulations on the new role and the new title and the exciting new perspective that you bring to the network, and hopefully it cascades through some of the other parts of the organization as you roll out your point of view and your strategy. So if folks want to continue to follow along with your thinking or get in touch, learn more, where would you like to send people?
Yeah, I'd say LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn. That's where I'm the most vocal, not that vocal anywhere else. So yeah, just I'm on LinkedIn. I can be found in random places across the web.
Let's go. Well, we will link to some of those random places in the show notes. And for those of you who are seeing the show for the first time, don't forget to give us a follow or a subscribe. If you're listening to the show, a honest review on whatever platform you might be listening on is how we find a larger audience organically. And last but not least, if there's somebody in agency land who you think needs to rethink the client experience and the account management title, or a client that wants to be treated more in that way, or potentially who you just think would benefit from the conversation that I had with Daale today, don't forget to share the show. And with that, I will wish you a great morning and a happy weekend. Thanks for coming on and spending some time with the audience and bringing us up to speed with your thinking.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.
All right. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.